I want to start with just saying one thing. 50 years after the signing of the Voting Rights Act, and the last time you and I were together was in Selma, and I just, because I don't think it can be said enough, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You've been so kind. Thank you very much.
And I want to be clear that when I say thank you, I mean both for your actions on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but also for the 50 years of work thereafter. The president just said he does not know what resources it is you have that you gather up to continue this work all these decades later. So maybe you can give us some insight into that.
Well, as you well know, I grew up in rural Alabama, about 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. My father had been a sharecropper, a tenant farmer, but in 1944, when I was 4 years old, I mean, listen, I remember when I was 4. And my father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. My family still on this land today. And when we would visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. And I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old and in 10th grade, I heard of Rosa Parks, heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me to find a way to get in the way, to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. So in 1956, at the age of 16, with some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we went down to the public library in the little town of Troy, Alabama, trying to get a library card, trying to check out some books. And we were told by the librarian that the library was for whites only and not for coloreds. I never went back to that library, not the same building, until July 5th, 1998, for a book signing of my first book. And after the book signing was over, they gave me a library card. And when I finished high school in May of 1957 at the age of 17, I wanted to attend Troy State College, now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the college. So I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and told him I needed his help. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my teachers, any of my brothers and sisters. Dr. King wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I'd been accepted at a little college in Nashville, Tennessee, American Baptist College, where I spent 4 years, and then I went on to Fisk for 2 years, studying philosophy and religion. And I told one of my teachers that I'd been in contact with Dr. King. So this teacher and Dr. King had studied together at Morehouse College in Atlanta. And Dr. King got back in touch and suggested when I went home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, boarded a Greyhound bus from Troy to Montgomery. And a young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, who was the lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King and the Montgomery movement, became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and during the march from Selma to Montgomery, met me at the Greyhound bus station, and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a colleague of Dr. King in the Montgomery movement, and ushered me into the pastor's study. And I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared, I didn't know what to say or what to do. And Dr. King said, "Oh, you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I'm John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. And he started calling me the boy from Troy. And I got involved in the civil rights movement as a student in Nashville. And I have not looked back since. I've been getting in good trouble ever since.
There are so many things I love about that story. Just last week, I was here in Washington, D.C., actually here in the Eisenhower building with a group of 4 college students from Wake Forest. And one of my students at one point just asked me, he says, "Why did you bring us? Why would you, sort of take the time to bother. And I told him a story about a professor of mine, Dr. Maya Angelou, who took me out of the classroom, not just my student in the classroom, but my student. And so to hear you tell that story, it is a reminder of how powerful it is when, and I think all of us can probably tell the stories not only of our parents who did this work for us, but our teachers and members of our community who saw something and grabbed us and gave us opportunities. Sometimes, in this case, a very dangerous opportunity. It's not an opportunity to be protected and away from the movement, but actually to be at the very heart of a storm, but that nonetheless helped to change your country. No one in the US Congress right now is more responsible for the Voting Rights Act of 1965 than you are. And yesterday, that appeals court says that despite all of the gutting that has happened, it nonetheless continues to have teeth. Just how powerful is that little act of yours?
Well, it have changed not just the South, but change America forever. If it hadn't been for the Voting Rights Act, hadn't been for the courage of Rosa Parks, the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr., and the countless individuals, black, white, Latinos, Asian American, Native American, young and old, who just got in the way, who just got tired, and said, we're not going to take it anymore. So we went through training. We just didn't go out one day and start sitting in. I came here the first time in 1961 to go on the Freedom Rides. Same year that President Obama was born.
Wow.
21 years old, had all of my hair, as I said earlier. 13 of us. 7 blacks and 6 white. Back in 1961, black people and white people couldn't be seated together on a Greyhound bus leaving Washington, D.C. to travel through Virginia, through North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. We were on our way to New Orleans to test the decision of the Supreme Court. There were people afraid to be afraid. We had to change that. We had to change it by literally putting our bodies on the line. So you can beat us, you can throw us in jail, but we're not afraid. I didn't like those signs. I didn't like segregation and racial discrimination. So I think Dr. King saw something in me, and he encouraged me. In a sense, it became like a big brother, a shepherd.
You talk about 1961 being a time when black people and white people cannot sit together on that bus ride through the South. In 2015, 9 people went into their church and knelt down onto their knees in South Carolina to pray and be part of their own Bible study in their own community. No reason to be afraid, and were slaughtered. We took down the flag in South Carolina as a result. That is a meaningful change. But was that enough? Should it have done for this country what Edmund Pettus Bridge did? Should it have made us determine for a new Voting Rights Act?
What happened in Charleston, South Carolina, should have said to America, let's take that great leap. You know, President Barack Obama delivered a magnificent, unbelievable eulogy speech. I wanted to license him, ordain him. and I said, amen, Mr. President. He made me cry. The same way that President Johnson's speech on March 15, 1965, after Bloody Sunday, when he said, and we shall overcome. Somehow, in some way, I think as a nation and as a people, we need to wake up, and we need to speak up and speak out in different ways, and waking up and speaking up and speaking out. You have to find a way to get in the way and get in good trouble. We're just too quiet. We need to make some noise.
The young people in the Black Lives Matter movement are not being quiet. They're getting in the way all over the country. I'm wondering what you think about that movement.
Oh, I'd like to see more of them get in the way. I'd like to see some of the older one of us getting in the way. And it doesn't matter. whether we're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We all must get in the way. We had a coalition back in 61, 63, 64, and 65. If we're going to redeem the soul of America, if we can get it right, maybe we can serve as a model for the rest of the world, but we must get it right.
You began by telling your story about your first act of civil disobedience being trying to get a library card. And you made quite a splash at Comic-Con this summer. Nerdland, really, we were beside ourselves about this. Can you tell me what was in your backpack?
Well, you know, I tried to have the backpack at Comic-Con look the same way as it did on March 7, 1965. I had 2 books. I had an apple. I couldn't find an orange, so I didn't have an orange. I had toothpaste and toothbrush. And I was surrounded by a group of young children, 3rd graders. Beautiful, young children who had been reading March, Book 1 and Book 2, my story of my involvement in the American Civil Rights Movement. And they walked with me down a set of steps and then up another set of steps onto the floor of the convention, and a whole crowd just started walking with us. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of Selma. Pick 'em up, lay 'em down, all the way from Selma town.
Is that why you chose graphic novels, so that you could impact kids that young, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, to tell this story to young people who might not have access to the big language yet?
Well, that is the basic reason why we did it. I remember back in 1958 reading a little comic book called Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery Story. 14 pages, sold for 10 cents. And Dr. King helped edit this. Can you imagine seeing Martin Luther King Jr. editing a comic book? But that book,
it's like Representative Lewis writing a graphic novel and coming to Comic-Con.
Right. Well, this little book, edited by Martin Luther King Jr., telling the story of Rosa Parks in Montgomery, inspired and influenced hundreds and thousands of Americans, but people around the world. It became our way of learning. You know, we would be sitting in because of what Dr. King wrote in that little book. We'd be sitting there at a lunch counter waiting to be served, and someone would come up and spit on us, or put a lighted cigarette out in our hair or down our backs, pull us off the lunch counter stools. Then we get arrested and go to jail. The first time I went to jail was February 27, 1960. I just turned 20. And my folks had told me, don't get in trouble, don't get in the way. I got arrested. I felt so free. I felt so liberated. And, you know, during the 60s, I got arrested 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, 5 more times. And probably will get arrested again for something.
When you talk about being arrested and you talk about fear, and we think about the moment on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that is so available to all of us, you talk about Black Lives Matter, and it is impossible to think about that idea of arrest right now without the fear, the videos that so many of us see. And I wonder if you can connect voting and the act of citizenship and voting to this problem of policing that we also often experience in communities. Is there a link between those things?
Oh, by all means. I happen to believe, and I truly believe this, that the vote is precious, almost sacred in a democratic society. It is the most powerful, non-violent instrument or tool that we have, and we have to use it. When people come together and pool their political power, they can determine who is the mayor, who is the police chief, who is the governor, who is the congressperson, and who is the president of the United States. And President Barack Obama is so right. we need to be dropping in rather than dropping out. We got to mobilize and organize and get people to turn out and vote in every single election. As I said earlier, people died and bled. As the president said, countless individuals' names that we would probably never know. But friends of mine, people that I went to jail with, people that I marched with, people that I saw in Mississippi, in Alabama, in Southwest Georgia, in Tennessee. They were brave and courageous, but they all didn't live to see the Voting Rights Act pass and signed into law on August 6, 1965. And we are indebted to those.
This morning I asked Twitter to send questions, to ask Representative Lewis questions. So let me just ask you a few of those questions. Rachel DeCoste says, what would you say to those who feel that fighting for voting rights is futile because they won't let us win?
Well, we can win. We all can win, but we must win together. I know that some people are saying it doesn't matter. It does matter. In Lowndes County, Alabama, the county was more than 80% African American in 1965, 50 years ago. Had a very mean sheriff. There was not a single registered African American voter in the county. But after the Voting Rights Act was passed, they elected an African American sheriff. The next county south of Selma, Greene County, Utah, Alabama, they elected a nonviolent sheriff, a young African American man who never carried a gun. In Selma, when people got to vote, you had a mean guy there named Sheriff Jim Clark, who was very mean, who wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side, carried an electric typewriter in his hand. He didn't use it on cows. Wore a button that said never. He guarded the courthouse like it was his own home. But when the Voting Rights Act was passed and signed into law in 1965, the next election, black people and white people came together, pooled their votes, and defeated him. So those same hands that pick cotton, pluck tobacco, worked in the fields, mopped the floors, they're helping to change America forever. America would never, ever be the same. So when people said to me, you know, it doesn't matter, it won't count, I feel like saying, come and walk in my shoes.
Jamar asks, and I think in part when you ask, when you talk about hands that have done this work, Jamar asks about another set of hands. He says, should voting rights be extended to those who are ex-felons?
Voting rights should be extended to all of our citizens. Let's open up the political process and let everybody come in. Let everyone participate. How long must a person pay for the crime they committed? They should have a right to participate. The people, we count them for the census. They get goods for our counties, for our cities, for our states. So they should have some say about it. That's not fair. That's not right. That's not just. To say because you're a felon, you cannot participate.
Chelsea Ann asks the question, how can students on college campuses promote voter registration?
Well, first of all, students can play a major role. I know what it is to be a student. When people told us not to sit in, not to go on a freedom ride, not to get involved in that mess, that's what some people call the movement, we got involved. And we have to bring about a nonviolent revolution, a revolution of values, a revolution of ideas. Students can organize and see that when the school year open up, see that every single freshman become a registered voter. In some states, the state of Texas tried to make it impossible for students to use a student ID. Yep. But if you had gun registration, it was okay. But not a student ID, even from some of the state colleges and universities.
And the last one I'll ask you from us, from Twitter, and I don't think it's actually from Beyonce, but she does call herself Queen Bee. She asks, I think, what is the key question all of us are asking? Are we going to get a new VRA formula to the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives?
It is going to be very hard and very difficult, but I must tell you, I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. Some people accuse me of being too hopeful, too optimistic. But you must never give up. That's part of the nonviolent philosophy. To be hopeful, to be optimistic. And in the process, you can make it happen. You can make it real. We will get it. We will get it.
Representative Lewis, we begin by saying thank you, and I once again say thank you so much.